What's up, everyone? Welcome to Weekends with Kasparian and Michael Brooks. We have an awesome show ahead for you today. Later, we will be doing our usual SALT segment, and Democrats are the target. Michael, how are you?
I'm doing well, Anna. I'm very, very excited to talk about the Democratic leadership's coming to America sartorial choices with you. Look, in general, I think, a lot of us are exhausted. I'll say, especially last week when, definitely not as much as many others, but I was going out and doing some demonstrating. Like, Corona was the last thing on my mind, and now it is very much up in my mind.
Really?
3 weeks. I had 3 months of taking Corona ultra seriously, and then I felt like I basically forgot about it for 2 weeks, and now I'm back to remembering it.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same boat. Partly because you're seeing a spike in various states that open too early. And it's terrifying because there's the economic factor to it that isn't being discussed nearly enough. Congress seems to have given up completely when it comes to stimulus. And we have a complete and utter economic disaster coming up in the fall with all of these stimulus programs, like the more robust version of unemployment, coming to an end. So I don't know what's going to happen to all these people who aren't going to be able to obviously pay for their rent, their health care, food on the table for themselves and their kids. And, part of me thinks that some of the unrest that's taking place right now has relieved members of Congress because they don't have to discuss some of the difficult economic questions that are coming up.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I actually just interviewed Cedric Johnson, who is another scholar that I admire a lot. And I think what he said was like obviously the core of the demonstrations and what sparked it is police violence, racism, and all of the constellation of economic and political issues around that. And then he also, to him, was like, yeah, I think these are also less formally and in the back end. He's like, these are also the first Trump era bread riots. Like, we're in a depression. There's no serious systemic help that's being provided at all. And of course, even before we were in a pandemic/depression with over 40 million jobs lost, we already were in an economy that was absolutely brutal and just simply did not work for the vast majority of people. So I think you're right. And I think, this is another thing, and we'll get to it later. We're also going to have Shama Sawant on from the Seattle City Council, which is going to be our interview today. We're really excited about that. Exactly like does this uprising and these movements go to actual serious systemic change in policing, and then all of the constellation of issues that are connected to it? Or does it become, the latest iteration of sort of middle class HR politics, which isn't going to deal with the next wave of things that are coming at us? And I don't know, Anna, it's like we're in a failed state. I mean, it's just
sure.
And that's been the case for a long time in many, many different ways. But I still think that on a basic governing level, even the most cynical would still be like, wow, okay, we're going to have a pandemic and a depression, and we're just simply not going to have any systemic response to it other than an over $4 trillion slush fund for the wealthiest companies in the world, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And for all the Democratic members of Congress who are engaging in their performative politics, in their political theater, and pretending as though they're outraged about the lack of transparency by Steve Mnuchin when it comes to the $500 million billion that they gave him in order to dole out to corporations, that's the way the bill was written. They signed on for that. They can't pretend like Steve Mnuchin is breaking some rule or some regulation. They empowered him to take, again, $500 billion and give it out to, who knows, probably to companies that are associated with the Trump family, probably companies that are associated with his friends, with his own family. I mean, there's no transparency because there didn't need to be transparency based on how that law was written.
And
I just want
explicitly yesterday or the day before, right? He's like, I'm not going
right.
to tell. It's a question of privacy. Do you think when you talk to people in your circle, in your world, who are, you know, normies or not as politically in tune, whatever, is it shifting in terms of like how they think about these things and what's on their mind, or no?
Honestly, I'm really sad to report that no. There is just there's a mountain of propaganda, misinformation, fear mongering, and it's nonstop. I mean, the emphasis on looting in the beginning of these protests blows my mind when, you know, you just take a step back and you look at the bigger picture and you realize where the looting has been happening, right? It's just the criminality that they fearmonger about has been happening on the street, on Wall Street. And there have been no criminal prosecutions, consequences, none of that. Those laws have been broken. The fraud that was committed, which led to 2008, and then we bailed out those big banks and those big companies. Like, that's the kind of looting that people should be concerned about. But it's incredible how difficult it is to like deprogram people who unfortunately have been consuming the propaganda in mass media. It's really, really hard to convince them otherwise. So, and you know, the whole thing about defunding the police is such a bad idea because we need the police to protect us. Okay, well, fine. Let's concede to that. But then let's take a look at where the resources have been spent and what type of crime has been focused on. Gavin Newsom literally had to pass a law in the state of California to force the police to actually test the rape kits that have been piling up over the decades. I mean, what the hell? Like, we've been increasing the police budget year after year after year, even as all these other programs in Los Angeles, for instance, have been cut. Education, consistently dealing with cuts, right? We keep giving the police more money, and what, they can't investigate rape? So Absolutely. What are they investigating? I mean, they've become regressive tax collectors. That's essentially
regressive tax collectors, and they're policing, you know, essentially poor communities, working communities, and communities of color to set the context for gentrification, for all of these other, you know, and just like the basic context that we have chosen as a policy course to not do anything about any of these issues, and then just sort of use state violence as a source of revenue collection, and also, you know, to terrorize people. And I think it's really interesting and something that people, you know, the fight is so serious because on one hand, where, you know, people with the more, like with the abolish critique are right, is that all of this stuff that gets trotted out, like, oh, there needs to be more implicit bias training and that doesn't work. That does not get to the core of the problem. That does not lessen the rate of murder and violence. And I mean, again, just even like literal, essentially police terrorism we've seen the last couple of weeks with these demonstrations. And even the strategy, by the way, to allow looting to happen in certain places as the context, so you can go and rush at and crack heads on demonstrators. But, you know, and then on the other hand, I think, yeah, like the defund question is really interesting, because then it's like, okay, if we're talking about, first of all, that we have to get rid of a whole, and we'll talk about this more later, get rid of the war on drugs, get rid of broken windows policing, all of these like actual systems reforms, as well as, of course, enhancing civil rights law and doing work like that. Of course, but then you have to get into the distribution question. And then on the other hand, I think, you know, get to this other paradox that, again, I'll be talking about him later, that, you know, Cedric Johnson kind of highlighted of on one hand, and what the response is to is this massive race and class driven over policing and totalitarianism, like literal anti-democracy. And then actually with certain serious crimes like rape, murder, an enormous amount of basically under-resource and lack of taking seriously in the same communities that are terrorized for bullshit. So, you know, there's a lot to tease out here. And I think, yeah, we need to get really, really serious when we go to the policy phase, because of course this could turn into just another wave of privatization and austerity, or, you know, toothless reforms that, as an example, people point out, Minneapolis did a lot of these things, and here we are.
Yeah, exactly.